It is now time to bring on our subject matter experts. Cheng is a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution and author of the book Middle Class Shanghai, Reshaping U.S.-China Engagement. And Kerrigan is the president and CEO of the Small Business and Entrepreneurship Council. Welcome to you both. Let me just start out with you, Cheng Li. Cheng, you and I have had conversations in the past about this, but when you set out to start documenting the importance of the rising middle class in China, particularly the Shanghai middle class, your publisher walked away from the deal. Tell us about that.
Well, that was my first book. I was sent to China by a U.S.-based foundation to observe grassroots changes in Shanghai, my native city. After 2 years, my referential experience, I wrote the book, The Rise of China's Middle Class. But the book, when I sent it to the publisher in 1996 or 97, rejected 7 or 8 times. The reviewer have the same comment. There's no such thing called the Chinese middle class, because middle class related with civil society, related with political democracy, and etc. So that they believe that in China there's only a very small number of corrupt officials and a large number of poor people. But that was 25 years ago. Certainly 10 years later people changed their mind. But anyway, my book was published but with a different title called Rediscovering China, and then actually become a best-selling book widely used in American classroom.
It's an absolutely fascinating story. I love hearing about the Chinese middle class, and we will come back to that in a moment. But I want to go to Kerrigan and to her constituency in America's small business sector. Karen, after the pandemic, after all of us going online, buying online, communicating with grandkids online, all of those dimensions, so much of the digital platforms we have out there are fundamental for your community. Have they opened their aperture? Do they see the opportunities not only domestically in the United States, but those platforms allow them to think globally about reaching other kinds of customers?
Well, over the past 5 to 10 years, they were doing that increasingly, and certainly COVID-19 and the acceleration to all things digital and more small businesses doing things online, embedding technology across their operations, using technology platforms, social media, etc., really has been a game changer for many small businesses in understanding, the markets, that they've been missing over the years. And so it's just great that we have this tremendous ecosystem of platforms that exist, global platforms, whether it's Alibaba, Amazon.com, small, mid-sized platforms where, small businesses can turn to access, these markets and get the back-end support, the logistical support that they need to deliver their products and goods to countries. But I do have to say that, COVID really did open the eyes of many small business owners. They were finding new consumers from all over the world were finding them online because everyone was online. So there's tremendous opportunity. And I think now with this boom in entrepreneurship, in fact, Steve, the retail sector is the one sector where we see the most interest, where we saw the most new business applications in 2020, the online retail sector. And I think many of those businesses, one will start as, a lot of them will be e-commerce businesses, but they'll go global from the start because of all this support and all these great platforms.
Cheng, for a long time, I was involved in kind of U.S.-Japan trade stuff. This was, decades ago. This is when people wanted to buy a baseball bat, and it was tough because of non-tariff barriers in Japan. But things seem to have changed today, that person in the middle class in Shanghai and elsewhere in China that you're talking about seems to want to buy products before. It's a different kind of dynamic. But what is going on right now is that U.S.-China tensions are tense, that there are a lot of issues outside of the business and commerce side of it that are bubbling up and creating problems. How are things going when you look at what the Chinese middle class wants? Do you see this collision course set with where we are politically?
Absolutely. That you do see the contradiction. On the one hand, you also see the rise of nationalism in China, including those in Shanghai. But at the same time, the middle class, also the Western middle class influence and the lifestyle profoundly reshaped China, not only just Shanghai, but also extend to inland, second tier and third tier cities. Now, the ongoing policy and political discourse on China in the United States today disproportionately focuses on Beijing, on the Chinese authoritarian system, on the China threat, and on the fatalistic view, often treated the most populous country in the world in a monolithic way. So the thesis of my book on Shanghai runs contrary to prevailing views in Washington regarding the failure of U.S. engagement policy toward China, or negative assessment of the 4 decades-long multi-dimensional exchanges. The commercial is only one front, but also in terms of values, attitudes, and behavior. Now, there are several main components of these negative views in the United States. For example, the viewing that the Chinese middle class as a political ally of the party state or whole of society threat, without recognizing the dynamism and the diversity of this new socio-economic force and its transitory political role. Now, the central argument of my book is Shanghai is not a monolithic entity, and certainly China is not either. A middle-class Shanghai actually reveals China's unsettled future because of even Shanghai embody what I call two tails of a city. Shanghai can serve as the vanguard of middle-class worldly or cosmopolitan voices, views, and values, such as property rights, emphasis on education, environment, food and medicine, safety, and the government accountability and transparency. Yet, at the same time, Shanghai may increasingly become the showcase of China's growing nationalism and the mercantilistic global outreach. Now, my point here is that we should place Shanghai's future and China's future in an ever-changing domestic and international context. We should remember that the U.S.-China relations are not just state-to-state relations, but also people-to-people relations. Two largest middle-class countries in the world need to find a way to reshape their long-term engagement.
Kerrigan, let me ask you a question about your constituency and about America and America's engagement in the world, and what makes us powerful? Is it the size of the military, or is it the size of and the richness of our economy, of our innovation, of our businesses and being abroad? There is a kind of tension out there, and I have this question from Lisa, and she says, aren't there things the United States and Europe can do to reawaken that economic power and economic strength, and also build in Asia and China and get back to that sort of thing? So I'm interested to you in how you see American engagement in the world and what makes us powerful.
Well, definitely, I think, on the economic front and innovation and sort of the leadership, that the U.S. has demonstrated over the years on economic leadership and sort of bringing all the tools and, the best in class of how to replicate this in other countries clearly has been fantastic from a diplomatic perspective. And also the U.S. leading on trade. I mean, we've led on trade, global trade agreements for many, many years. And I think we do have to get back to that. I mean, there's no doubt about it. And from the U.S. perspective, if we're not, if our small businesses and if our business community is not tapping into, if you just look digitally, the 2 billion people who bought online last year, 785 million of them, I might add, were in China, then it's going to be, other businesses and other entrepreneurs. So, I think you're right. Leading on U.S. economic, leading on the economy and leadership and trade is critically important, and we have to get back in the game and lead on that role for our economy, because now the world is very, very competitive.
Right.
Not only China, but India, Europe. I mean, it's very competitive, and we have to be very engaged in order for and active in order for our businesses to take advantage of this growing middle class, and also this recovery coming out of the COVID-19 crisis.
Karen, I'm going to ask you an unfair question, perhaps, because it's going to be micro, when I know you deal with micro stuff. But among your constituencies that are thinking about global exports, whether it's to Europe or Latin America or Asia, are there any stories that stand out that you could share with us of enterprises that have really made it by broadening, their terrain and going beyond their neighborhood via digital platforms, via the rest of the world, and exporting?
Well, yeah, I mean, there was, and actually we're having a State of Small Business and Startups in the Digital Economy event tomorrow. And one of our members, Sarah Piles of Rhinestone Lip Gloss, who just basically puts rhinestones on a lot of things and does great jewelry, because of social media and because of technology platforms, she started her business on Facebook, and now using the power of technology, sells to 30 countries. Look, she never thought that she would be doing what she's doing 10 years ago. I think when she was a translator for a big company, but then just, started her own business. And really it's because of technology and these platforms, social media. I mean, all the things that we see happening right now is why she was able to launch and grow so successfully, not only domestically, but also globally.
Cheng, I want to ask you a final question. And we've talked a lot about the rising middle class and their appetite for stuff from all over the world. And I guess my question to you is the Chinese government listening to their middle class? Are they expressing what they want? Is what they want being felt by the government, in your view?
Well, I think it's an ongoing process. I think that both governments should pay attention. I think that I'm glad that the Biden administration put the American middle class first. I think it's the right strategy. But we also should see that in some areas, the U.S. have advantage, as Karen said. American private sector is very dynamic. American technology is still advanced than any other country. But we also should know that anticipated China's e-commerce advancement, including distance learning, telemedicine, and vehicle networking, and the smart city technologies, with 3.5 trillion yuan investment, according to the country's current 5-year plan, will make China more competitive in the increasingly digitalized global economy. To date, China's 940 million plus internet users make up the world's largest online community. In just a couple of years ago, 86% of Chinese had broadband access, compared to 73% of Americans. There are more than 3 times as many smartphone users and 11 times as many mobile payments users in China as they are in the United States. So I think the U.S. government need to emphasize that middle-class development by also promote e-commerce, digital economy, and also infrastructure development, whether it be road and also will be softer kind of infrastructure like telecommunication and etc. So I think that we do need to put that in the global perspective.
I find this conversation so interesting, and I'm really fascinated by this question of what's happening in new platforms, how products and the folks behind them are telling their stories. I want to tell our audience I just went onto one of these global online platforms and was able to walk through a fully 3D digital IKEA. That although you're looking at the computer, it felt like you were really in the aisle, looking at all the, neat tchotchkes and whatever that IKEA had and all the furniture and whatnot. So we're in a very different age in which, digital opportunity and, products and people being able to buy what they want and sell what they want is going to take on a very new dimension as we go forward, in my view. I want to thank Cheng Li, who is director of the John L. Thornton Center at the Brookings Institution. He's senior fellow as well. But more importantly, he's the author of Middle Class Shanghai, Reshaping U.S.-China Engagement. And please check out that book. And Karen Kerrigan, my good friend, President and CEO of the Small Business and Entrepreneurship Council here in Washington, D.C. Thank you for what you do and for your constituency. Thanks so much for being with me today.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
That brings us to the end of our program today. A big thank you to all of you for your support and for attending this and listening to these conversations today. Please share them with your friends. All of this will be up on our website shortly. Thanks again. I'm Steve Clemons. Be well.